Right.
So we've got a licensed appraiser here. Scott, it's Scott Wheeler, right?
Scott Wheeler,
Yeah,
yes.
Scott Wheeler. And what's the company you work with?
It's Wheeler Appraisal
And you've been doing this for how long?
for 30 years.
So been around the block,
Yeah.
knows the business, made it through '08. They didn't take his license away.
No.
You're laughing, but like, dude, I have a couple, I'm sure you remember back in the day when it was the wild, wild west. I mean, we used to have relationships with appraisers. I mean like lenders, right?
Right.
And we wouldn't order through an appraisal management company. We had appraisers on speed dial that we would connect with that dealt with certain neighborhoods and everything like that. We'd call them directly. We'd fax
Right.
over the order
Right.
and get them out there. And unfortunately, a couple of the guys I was working with, they don't do it anymore, and it's not because they got out of the business themselves.
Yeah. It definitely changed. Changed the way I have to market myself. It changed the way I can talk to lenders.
Yeah.
It's just the whole thing changed. But we adapted.
Yeah. Well, and you hit one of the words that I've been talking about on a lot of these podcasts, which is adaptation, because we're seeing a slowdown in the business, which obviously affects lenders, it affects real estate agents, and therefore it affects appraisers as well. And I think that that's one of our superpowers as people that are in real estate. We have to adapt, right?
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of real estate brokerages right now that are consolidating. We're seeing people that are exiting the business altogether. And we're seeing a lot of lenders that are going out of business right now. And not to the point of it being scary or anything like that, but it excites me because you start to see the people who are really going to stick around.
Right.
And there definitely is. This will be my fourth economic downturn. And I guess if you've been doing it for 30 years, it's going to be your fifth.
Yeah.
I always think that those first couple of years coming out of those economic downturns are always the best ones because you really do have the cream of the crop that are staying in the business.
You do. Yeah. It's, going through these downturns, you just you can reset yourself.
Yeah.
I'm going out and talking to clients that I haven't talked to in years, especially like during the pandemic when I couldn't, talk to everybody. I was just trying to get appraisals out and, 2 to 3 week turn times. And,
Were you doing a lot of refi stuff at that point?
A lot.
How did that work during COVID? It's funny because I didn't have any, I haven't asked any appraiser this. Like, how did that work during COVID when you were going into people's homes that actually live there? Of course, in a vacant property, if it's a purchase, I mean, no one's there. You just go in and out. But how are you dealing with the situation when you have families in a house and COVID were not supposed to be,
Well, most people were receptive because they wanted to refinance their house. So they had to have me there to do the appraisal.
So they were willing to dance with the COVID
Right.
for the refi.
Well, most of the time, I would set it up and say, y'all can be inside. I really didn't have any issues with it, but
Right.
a lot of people did. And so I said, if y'all want, y'all can open all the doors, step out on the back patio, and I can, do my thing, and then y'all can just come back in. And
Crazy times.
yeah. But most people were very receptive to everyone.
Well, it is Texas, right? So
Yeah.
it's probably different than if you were up in like Michigan or something like that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, every once in a while, you run into something and then I'd have to turn around and go back to the office. So
Gotcha. But yeah, I wanted to bring it back. I mean, one of the things that we do on this podcast, in addition to talking about real estate, is we try to keep it entrepreneurial. And I like that you were kind of going into what you're doing to generate new business. You said that you're connecting with people that you haven't really connected with in a while. What other things are you doing right now that's kind of helping you generate new business at this point?
Well, I've revamped my website, so
Okay.
that I had somebody help me with that, and they, when you pull up Appraisal Austin, my website should be one of the first ones that comes up.
Nice.
I'm getting a lot of action on that from just individuals. I'm getting a lot of family law cases through that. Getting some pre-listing appraisals.
Yep.
And a lot of estate appraisals
Gotcha.
are coming through the website. So that's kind of helping me get through this time of higher interest rates.
Right.
That's really about it. Just more or less that, and
Making
then
those
just
connections.
reaching out to people, like I said before.
So let's talk a little bit about appraisals, right? And I know that the short answer is it's a dance, right?
Yeah.
Because as a lender, I deal directly with appraisers all the time. And then, people who are buying and who are selling, typically they're maybe ordering an appraisal once every 5 years if they buy or if they refinance or anything along those lines. And of course, everybody who's buying or selling has the nicest house in the neighborhood, right?
Right.
And it's the most upgraded.
Right.
And all the other houses are total junk.
Correct. Correct.
And so, in addition to the fact that everybody wants their house to appraise for as much money as possible, there's also a lot of emotion associated with it.
Yes.
And so, how do you, how do you navigate that? Number one, and then number two, what are your responses when I think you probably are getting a lot of heat from real estate agents, lenders, and maybe even the buyers and sellers about, well, this house appraised for this. I mean, what do those conversations look like, and how do you answer them?
Right now, it's obviously pretty tough because a year and a half ago, prices were up 20%.
Right.
Now they're still up from where they were 3-4 years ago, but they're down from where the height. So, I go in and I say I just go in with a smile.
Yeah.
And then when they come out and, if it doesn't happen to appraise or they don't like something about the appraisal, hopefully my research, helps me let them know that, okay, well, this is why I made these adjustments, or this is why, your house isn't valued as high as another house.
What seems to be the biggest misconception? Is it square footage? Is it proximity to comparables? Like, what seems to be the biggest disconnect? And I would envision mainly with lenders, real estate agents, or even the sellers themselves that say, hey, here's what we think this house is worth and here's why. And you're like, listen, I see what you're saying, but here's what I have to take into consideration more so than maybe some of the other things that you're presenting.
From a real estate agent standpoint, and agents have gotten a lot better about this, but it's usually price per square foot.
Okay.
So they say, well, the price per square foot in this neighborhood is, $200 a square foot.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be, a house that's 1,000 square feet and I'm 2,000 square feet. So the difference, the bigger the house, typically the less it is per square foot.
Gotcha.
And so I have to make those adjustments, I don't adjust like whatever the price per square foot is in that neighborhood. I take, a portion of that because when you're doing an appraisal, the land value is included in that price per square foot. If it's got a pool, if it's got a guest house, the fencing, the yard, it's all included. And I'm just adjusting on price per square foot on that line. So, that's the main issue
right.
that comes up.
To just kind of reiterate what you're saying, you cannot just take a neighborhood and go price per square foot. But then hypothetically, if you were to even try to do that, if we have 1,000 square foot home that's selling for 200, a square foot, we have to compare that to another 1,000 foot square home. Otherwise, we can't compare that to a 2,000 square foot home divided by 2. It just doesn't work that way.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. Yeah.
And you see a lot of that.
I think I used to.
Okay.
It's gotten a lot better. Realtors are, I've gone in and I've talked to realtors, in front of realtors before, and that's one of the main questions that comes up is what you just asked.
Right.
The other one is, what do you value a pool at? So just like
0. It's a liability.
It is, but people pay a lot for them.
It's wild, man.
And the houses right now, if they have a pool, they're selling.
Is that right?
And I went from like
with this summer we had, I could see it.
Yeah, and COVID too, because you couldn't go to the neighborhood pool. So you can just tell by how much pool companies are charging to put a pool in now. It's like double, triple the price it was.
Well, this summer was one of those summers where I had a couple of friends with pools, and man, if you didn't have a pool chiller,
yeah,
it was like, what's the point? You're jumping into like 95-degree water. It's
just
like
going to buy bags of ice at HEB.
Right, right. So one of the ones that I see a lot, because you may or may not know this, but when an appraisal comes back with the value that we don't want,
right,
the immediate comment is, well, Matt, you're appraiser, right? Because you're my appraiser.
Right.
And for those of you that don't know, when we order an appraisal, we order it through a third-party management company that chooses an appraiser at random. The idea is that, there's no relationship between you and I where I'm like, hey, Scott, if you don't get this one done, we're never sending you another piece of business. And so the appraisals are picked at random, and it's not my appraiser. But then I have these conversations on a regular basis with appraisers, and then we talk about comparables and everything. So I typically tend to be a little more versed than some of these agents. And I catch myself sometimes where I'm not like defending the appraiser, but I'm just kind of saying, well, here are the things that we're looking at. And the number one misconception that I see is I see a lot of agents that do things where we'll take a property, and let's just say we've got 2 or 3 sales that are maybe within a quarter mile, and then we've got another one that's maybe 3/4 of a mile out, which is a way better comp for what we're looking for in terms of value. And it's almost like they want us to skip over one that's like a little closer and utilize one that's a little bit further and say, well, that one sold for way less because, it was an off market, whatever the excuse is.
Right.
That's what I run into a lot. So what are your thoughts, or maybe even elaborate on how proximity is important more than I think most people know when you're doing an appraisal?
It depends on the area.
Okay.
For one. But if you're in an area like Circle C, it's a big, expansive subdivision.
Yep.
So you could have a house next door that sold, but it's not really comparable to yours.
Right.
It might not be the same in the same square footage bracket. It might not have the same upgrades, updates, pool, whatever. So then you go, maybe you have to go over a mile, but you're still in
The subdivision.
Subdivision. And we try to stay, you start off small and then you expand, and you try to find the best comparables to that home. What would a buyer going into that market, what would he want? Would he just look at this block? No, he's going to look at like this whole neighborhood. And so that's kind of the way we have to go about looking at comps. And you can get out of your market, and you can tell, then you got to start making land value adjustments and stuff like that. But that's kind of.
Well, based on what I'm hearing, it sounds to me like within reason. I mean, as an appraiser, and I guess I'll take your opinion on this as a blanketed statement. Appraisers want to do their best to have a home appraised. I mean, you're not out there to, screw anybody over, I guess.
We're not out there to screw anybody over. We're out there to do our job.
Yeah.
Whenever the sales price is higher than my appraised value, then I get comments back from the third party lender.
Right.
The agents will give me a call.
Right.
Sometimes the buyers give me a call. So it's not something that we're out there just to screw everybody over. We're out there to do a job, and if I do the best job I can, then I'm going to continue to get business. But if I half-ass an appraisal, then
right.
I'm not going to get that mortgage company's business anymore.
Sure. Yeah, the AMCs are going to be, they judge you at the end of the day.
Yeah, some of them have report cards, and they're like, well, how much, what was your turn time, and this is your score this month, and so they can definitely cut you off.
Right. So here's the big question that I wanted to ask, because the appraiser that was on here last time, I totally forgot to ask, but it's one that I get from real estate agents all the time, and I honestly don't even know the answer. So when we order an appraisal as a lender, we submit a copy of the purchase contract. Right. And how, for lack of a better term, how influenced are you as an appraiser by the purchase contract itself? In other words, some would argue that if you were appraising for a property, that you shouldn't have access to the purchase contract, that you should just go out there, look at comparable sales, and then submit an appraisal report. Because I've definitely run into instances where, we send out the purchase contract, comes back exactly at value, where maybe the buyers or even the real estate agents feel like, wow, we got a really good deal on this. Or even if there's a situation where we are looking to maybe add some seller concessions if value comes back, and they're like, they only appraised it at what the purchase, contract is, and they shouldn't have access to that. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are I think it's a good thing to have for an appraiser. I mean, we're not appraising to the contract price. We're still appraising for market value.
Okay.
But it's good to see that number on a contract. And plus, the contract tells you other things as well. I mean, it tells you, how much seller paid closing costs. When the contract when it went under contract, stuff like that. It's part of the appraisal report. So,
what's helpful about knowing the purchase price? I mean, you said it was helpful. How does that help you as an appraiser?
It just helps when we start off doing the appraisal. Putting a number, I don't know how to say.
Kind of like what we're trying to get the home to appraise for, basically, or at least knowing what someone's willing to pay for it.
Well, maybe what someone's willing to pay for.
Because I mean, that's one of the answers that I've heard, from other appraisers is, look, at the end of the day, market value is what someone's willing to pay, right? Yeah. And of course, we have ebbs and flows in the market. Like I remember, right when 2020 hit, and everybody was going out and buying homes, we couldn't get anything to appraise because things were moving so quickly that there just weren't any comparable sales. And it didn't mean that the house wasn't worth that. It's just, where were the comps? Yeah. And then once the market turned, we had a good 90 days to almost 6 months of where, the market was kind of cooling down. But I didn't have one issue with comparable sales because we had all these past comps of homes that sold.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of times what ends up happening is sometimes the comparables just can't keep up with the market as quickly as we need them to.
Especially during COVID.
Right.
And that's why the appraisal waiver came into play. Because of that reason right there. And so, you'd open a contract up when you get the order, and you'd see that appraisal waiver in there, and you have a little bit of sigh of relief because,
right.
I mean, you still want to do the best you can.
Sure.
But if a house is selling $200,000 over list price, which was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah. Then, you're just like, well, I mean, the comps haven't caught up to this one yet. This one, when it sells, it's going to be a good comp for the next one, but the next one might be $100,000 over list price. So,
right.
But yeah, so the market caught up to itself. It became easier for the appraised value to coincide with the contract price. And like now in this market, we had a low in November, December, January, February. Prices kind of came up a little bit. Now they're kind of, evening out. And so things, are appraising, more like what the contract price is.
Yeah, I would agree that I'm not seeing as many value issues as I was in the beginning of the year.
Right.
Because that was the time when, and I warned real estate agents about, protecting that equity. You're watching people come down on their purchase prices, on the listing side of things, where we were telling them, to operate more like builders and start giving concessions away instead of just reducing values, because it hurts the entire neighborhood.
Right.
And at least for a short period of time. And I was making public service announcements about it. And then when it hit. And of course, I got the call every time, well, you're appraiser, you're appraiser, you're appraiser. And I'm glad we're out of that, because I'm here to tell you, man, as a lender, like, we hear it just as well. Shit, we hear it probably even more than you.
Yeah, you probably get a little bit more.
Yep, it's crazy. Yeah. But you mentioned the appraisal waivers, which obviously is a form of like AI. What are your thoughts in regards to like artificial intelligence and appraisals? Like, does that concern you?
Yes, it does. I'm not sure where it's going. I mean, there's already, Fannie Mae has already put out, appraisal waivers for lenders. They put out desktop appraisals. They put out these hybrid appraisals. I don't really understand why you would get a hybrid appraisal. Having a third party person go look at it, that that isn't licensed, or they're just a photographer going
Right.
out to do it and setting up a camera to measure the house, which is, in my opinion, hasn't been right yet.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I mean, I can give you the why behind it. I've sat in
well,
all the presentations and stuff, and the main reason is because they feel confident in the value based on algorithms in terms of, neighborhoods and zip codes and things like that. The only thing that AI can't do is prove that, the house hasn't been gutted.
yeah,
I've sat through appraisal presentations where I've watched a guy that was an appraiser flash a photo of just of a home in the front and goes, here's the home and here's what the appraised value was. And then it turned out to be like a straw buyer, and they showed the back of the house and half the house was ripped off.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So AI is never going to replace anybody to physically go out there. But to your point, I mean, we definitely have waivers where no one even goes and sees the home.
yeah. I mean, that it's kind of gone like that before. I mean, this isn't like brand new. I mean, we've had appraisal
Sure.
waivers in the past, and then it kind of there's a hiccup in the market, and everybody gets a little scared. So now we're gonna start sending more
Appraisers
appraisers
back
out
out,
there.
yep.
Yeah, and so hopefully it'll. I don't. The whole AI thing. I don't know.
Well, it's exciting and scary at the same time
Right.
because part of me envisions, you know, appraisers ultimately just doing what I just described, where the AI determines kind of a value. It meets our metric in regards to the loan, and then
Yeah.
the appraiser kind of just goes out there to validate and say, yeah, I mean, the house is intact, everything's fine, there's no major malfunctions. Because one thing that a lot of people don't understand that appraisers do outside of value is you're on the lookout for things that are health and safety related.
Yeah.
So, that's brings me into my next question that I get all the time from people. Right now, because of high interest rates and because of some of the changes that FHA has made to their monthly mortgage insurance premiums, we as lenders are seeing more value in getting people into FHA loans over conventional loans, even with high credit scores, even with, maybe high, what I would consider higher down payments, maybe more like 5-10%.
Right.
We're seeing people that are taking advantage of FHA, and then we get a lot of pushback, or even VA for that matter. We get a lot of pushback from real estate agents that are like, wait a second, I don't know how comfortable we feel with accepting this offer as an FHA pre-approval because this house is 15 years old and it's not a brand new build. I've had agents that, feel like if the house isn't brand spanking new, it's not going to go FHA, and they're nervous because they're nervous the appraiser is going to come out there and talk about the fact that, it hasn't been painted in 3 years or something like that.
Right.
So typically my response is, look, appraisers are looking for things that are health and safety related, plain and simple. And if there's anything that's a major health or safety issue, it doesn't matter if you're going FHA or conventional, it's going to get notated.
Yeah.
Right? And there seems to be some sort of misconception that if it's an FHA appraisal that you're just going to go out there. Doesn't matter if there's bare wires and, a hole in the roof and, again, anything major health and safety, that you're just going to go, well, it's conventional, here's the value as is,
Right.
and move on. So can you touch on a little bit of those health and safety issues and maybe some of those misconceptions that real estate agents feel when they're looking at a pre-approval that says FHA?
The FHA, I mean, honestly, I do an FHA appraisal basically the same way as I do a conventional appraisal. I mean, if there's a broken window, I'm still calling for it to be fixed. As a conventional loan, if there's a slab issue, which there's starting to be a lot more of that since the dry summer we had.
Yeah.
Then I'll call for a structural engineer for a conventional as much as for an FHA.
Mm-hmm.
FHA does have where, obviously they have the lead-based paint.
Which in Texas, we don't see a ton of that.
Well, and
Because was it 1978?
1976.
76.
Yeah.
So for those that don't know, if you have a home that is built in 1976 or earlier, there is a possibility that you have lead-based paint. And if any of that paint is chipping and peeling, Scott here is going to notate it.
Yeah. So then it would have to be scraped, not the whole house, just the part that's peeling.
Right.
Scraped, and painted.
And that's not just the house, too. I mean, that could be
Interior.
a back house. That could be a shed.
Yeah.
That could be any type of, building on the property that you would notate.
Correct.
And I mean, again, going back to what I was saying in terms of, Austin, we don't have a ton of homes built pre-1978. I mean, in the grand scheme of things in Austin.
Right.
So we just don't run into that. And the reason I mention it, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and it's like everything out there is built before 1978. So like lead-based paint is always a thing, and we always tell people, like, before you sell your property, like, look for chipping and peeling paint and everything along those lines. And just for the record, I mean, as crazy as it is, I actually had a situation where post-close we had a lawsuit where we had a couple that purchased a property, and, people make jokes like, well, if your kid's eating lead-based paint, like, you've got bigger problems. You're, almost calling them out as being bad parents. But the reality is a lot of these lead-based paint is on windowsills. And any of you who have children, they put their mouths on freaking everything.
Right.
And they will gum on a windsill. And this child ended up getting lead-based paint poisoning. And it wasn't anything detrimental, but it was a lawsuit. And at the end of the day, all of it was scraped. All of it was, painted over. Like, it's a real health and safety issue.
Yeah, for sure.
And I run into it a lot where an appraiser will notate it, and they're like, oh, that's such bullshit. Like, well, why do we have to deal with this? And everybody fights over who's going to fix it and who's going to pay you to go back out there to check on it. And
Right.
So lead-based paint is definitely a big one.
That's a big one. FHA.
And is that, you're going to do that FHA or conventional, or is that just
Conventional if it's a major deal.
Right.
I mean, if there's like a little bit, like a windowsill, probably not.
right?
FHA also wants you to, even if it's not built before 1976, and there's exposed wood on the outside,
Yeah,
they want you to paint over that.
termites.
Well, termites or just water damage, like wood rot. So that's kind of it was a newer thing to
Guideline.
FHA than, it's not brand new, but it
Sure.
was newer than the lead-based paint. Other than that, we're looking in the attic. We're not crawling through the attic. We're just doing a head and shoulders inspection of the attic.
And what would just, again, for the people out there, what for?
We're looking for, is there proper ventilation? If you get up there and there's just like there's no vents, then that could be an issue. We're looking for, like rodent, if there's any kind of
Health
rodent,
and safety.
yeah, rodent stuff going on, and then like if there's a fire at some point. So we're looking at like, okay, well, that beam over there has got black.